I came out to do a little bit of tidying up because I want to get started on something else tomorrow afternoon. I got to do some evil paperwork in the morning, business stuff. So I wanted to at least take this afternoon and try to get the thing back in shape here. I've got a couple of smaller projects that I'm thinking about doing. Well, I'm not thinking about doing, I'm going to do them and knock those out this week. And that will be 2 videos. And I'm not sure about the release schedule. Maybe I'll post one on Friday and one on Sunday. Or maybe I'll post one on Thursday and one on Sunday. I don't know. I'll have to see. They're not very big projects, so not like this Vise. And this Vise is the subject of this video, as you gathered from the title and probably from the thumbnail. I'll talk about this, and not only this, I want to talk about doing this in general. When you're making projects that you're putting online, and people, I don't know, I do know. It's not that I don't know, I do know. They've seen something else before it, and they immediately assume that you stole the idea from that person, or you copied it, or you were inspired by it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being the being inspired part. That is, when you steal something, that's another thing. When you blatantly copy something and you don't give credit where it's due, that's another. But that's not the case here. I started designing this mainly in my head immediately after I finished that Vise down there. I said to myself at the time, because I was looking at a lot of different Vise designs, and one of the Vise designs that I was looking at was that chain drive one. And I thought maybe that would be neat if you made one of those, a homemade one of those with chain. And then I got to thinking that it would be even neater if I were to make it with wooden gears. So at the time, I added that to my written list. I had a list back in the old days on paper, actually, that was beside, like on the end table, not the end table, but the table that's beside my chair in the living room. I would keep there, and I'd just jot down ideas. Eventually, I transferred that from the list onto my computer in a file. But eventually, after that, what I started doing was, instead of making lists, I started making what I call doodles in SketchUp. I'd open up SketchUp. I'd draw out my idea quickly, because part of this is, okay, people ask you where you get your ideas. Well, ideas pop up usually when you're doing something else. So while I was investigating, the Vise and other options for that and actually building the Vise, I, came up with those ideas about making the gear one. So you got to write those things down, or otherwise you're going to forget about them, especially when you're doing this week in and week out. So I wrote it down then. I transferred it to the notepad thing I'm not trying to justify what's going on here. I'm not trying to make a paper trail or anything for, the history of this. I'm just trying to give you an example of how this works for me. When I get an idea these days, I put it in a SketchUp drawing and I save that. And every once in a while, when I'm doing something else, and if I get stuck, and a good example of that was I was actually working on the drill press table that has gears, and I got stuck a little bit. It's not that I got stuck, it's that things weren't working. It's hard to put this into words, but sometimes you'll start on a project and everything will go smooth and everything will be like optimal. But that wasn't happening on that. There was like some kind of a blockage there that I wasn't seeing the correct way to do things. So I put that on hold. And, the fact that had gears reminded me that maybe now is a good time, because I wanted to get a plan out. And I said this in another video, but I'm pretty sure that was in Patreon. I wanted to get another video out with plans at this time of the year. So originally it was going to be the drill press table, but instead I did this. So they kind of reminded me of each other because I started, designing gears for that as well. The fact is that if I had have gotten my inspiration for this vise from Andrew's design, I would have said so in the video very clearly and very plainly. I would have put it something like, okay, I saw this really cool vise design from Andrew Klein, and I decided to try to make it from wood. I wouldn't have any problem saying that. And I know that people will say there's similarities between the two vices, but when you look at it closely, there's not. Obviously they both have gears, right? And obviously they both have two screws, but that's where the similarity ends. I went with the traditional twin screw design where you have two spindles, two handles, and the gears just link it. So, whereas his is center driven, which I think is really neat because you have that center handle only. So I would recommend when he does start selling those vices, I would recommend buying one because it looks really neat. And not only that, it's two speeds. You push it in and it goes faster, I think. Is it push it in or pull it out? One of it. You can go faster, so that's even better. This one here, I have to be honest, I made this more for like a novelty instead of it's a capable vise, but it's on that edge of practicality because it's so complex with the gears that you have to make for this, and then the fiddling around you have to do afterwards to get everything working smoothly because there is a lot. And I didn't want to put it in the video, saying how much there is, because that'll kind of turn people off. I'd like for people to at least try and not get turned off before they try, because I consider something like this, if you successfully build this and it works well, this is a good skill builder. If you're an intermediate woodworker to begin with, and you attempt to make this vise and you successfully make it, then I'd say you're well on your way. It's interesting because I had another idea when I pulled this design out to work on it again while I was working on the drill press thing. I had another idea occur to me of making this so that it had 3 lead screws. There'd be 2 towards the top and 1 towards the bottom, because even though the lead screws in this stop it from rocking side to side, it still can a little bit rock from top to bottom. So I was thinking that would make it, that would solve that so-called problem. And it'd be 3 screws rather than 2. But, I got to thinking about the drag on all of this. And I said to myself, you're not going to be able to turn that thing. There's going to be too much friction there for that to work. And then there'd be 3 things to try to line up rather than 2, which is always a lot more complex. So I went with this instead. But I think that's a neat idea that could be pursued. And maybe I would do that one day if I were to make something from steel. Because when you make it from wood, you're really tied down. A lot of people ask me about why the handle wasn't in the middle driving the center gear, and then that gear would drive the other gears that would drive the screws. And the fact is that you would not be able to put enough force on that gear to tighten up the vise here properly to hold something. First of all, any force that you're putting on that handle, on that center gear, would be divided by 2 because it's going to both screws. And you would have to put a lot of torque on those gears. And wooden gears are just not made for that kind of power transfer, I guess you could say. Whereas steel would be more than adequate. Even 1/8 inch steel would be thick enough to to do all of that. So that's something I've been thinking about, making a three-wheeler. But mainly what I wanted to do with this was I wanted to get this in place, get this project knocked out, get the plans for sale, because that's how I pay for all this, with the plans and the videos. So I want to get that done. The other thing I wanted to do after I had this and I could use this was take my other vise off, my quick release, and redesign that to make it like to incorporate some new things that I thought of after like I had that built. So one big thing is that the mechanism for changing, like it, for releasing it, you have to reach down underneath. Not a big deal because, okay, if you're using a vise constantly day in, day out, I can see that would be getting old. But if you're only using it like 2 or 3 times a week, like most people would be, reaching underneath is not a big deal. And what I have there with the mechanism that has is something that's really strong. I tested that already by crushing a battery, and that flipped a lot of people out saying, oh, you shouldn't crush those batteries. Anyway, so the other big thing about that is how far it sticks out. I made a major mistake with the spindle on that one, making it too long. At the time, I was thinking that I would have to embed that threaded rod into the spindle at least 3 inches to get good purchase on the wood, and then still put a pin in. And truth be told, the thing started to crack when I was tightening it on the battery there, the spindle itself. So I want to shorten that up. I keep walking into it where it is right now. It's, it's sticking out in my path, kind of. I've walked into it like a half a dozen times. So I take that off. I want to redesign it to something a little bit more efficient. I'm going to keep the same design on my website, but I'll make an updated version, maybe something that is a little bit smaller. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think about woodworking vices like this. Is bigger better or smaller better? What would you prefer? I know a lot of people doing this as a hobby and they want to have, a smaller workbench or whatnot. Would you prefer to see something smaller? Because I think that one, hold on, 17 inches long, and that seems bigger than this, but this is 18 inches long. So what do you think? Longer than that? Like 24 inches long, or smaller than that, say 15, 16 inches long? It would still be quick release. I don't know if I'd use the 1-inch rod though, because I made this with 1-inch rod, but I said in the plans and on the build article that you can use 3/4 inch, just drill the holes a different size, and use that instead. 3/4 inch threaded rod is easier to get than 1-inch threaded rod. I think I would do the same with that one, either like if it was small, 14 inches, 15 inches, I would change the threaded rod to 5/8. And 5/8, you can go anywhere, any hardware store, home center, big box store, and get 5/8 inch threaded rods and nuts and all that stuff. So 5/8 inch threaded rod, smaller package, quick release. I don't know if I'd use the pipes for the guide bars like I did here, but it'd be very rugged. That's another thing I need to point out. This design over here is a brute. Like this is really strong. This vise over here is what I would call a woodworking vise. You don't want to be trying to clamp up motor parts or anything in this. It will break. It's not as strong. It's not nearly as strong as that. So that's another thing to consider. What are some other neat designs that I have among my doodles? One is a scroll saw that I started long ago and got part of the way in and lost interest in it. Another is an actual spindle sander that I would really like to do, would really like to get a big problem with doing this is finding the time to do the big projects, because, you really have to keep pumping out the content. No matter what anybody says, you need to keep pumping out the content. Otherwise, you're going to stop making enough money, unless you're getting a bunch of sponsors, that is. Even then, I think you still have to keep pumping out the content. But a spindle sander, especially one that I started to design, would be a major undertaking. And I would have to set aside at least a couple of months to work through the plans and get all the details ironed out. And unlike this, I would have to prototype several stages of it before, I committed to it. Like this thing here, I was doing the plans along with building this, and I didn't even know for certain if this thing was actually going to rotate properly. So I'm pretty glad that it does. Spindle sander, different story. You don't want to be spending, a couple hundred hours on a plan if you haven't got all of the details nailed down and actually built in the real world. So that's a big one that's coming. Drill press table will be before that. Table saw, I'll be getting back to the table saw after I finish these two small projects that I was talked about at the beginning. I have the parts for the table saw in my house. I actually brought it in there to clear coat several of the parts. So that's all ready to go. I can bring that out. I'm not entirely certain on which part will be the next part in that build. As far as the drill press table, now there'll be people asking about that maybe. What happened to the drill press table? Well, I'm still stuck on some of the details on that, so I'm going to let it, come almost like osmosis. Like I said, when you're working on other projects, you have some free time to think about things. Like if you're doing some mindless stuff like sanding or whatever, sizing material, you get to be thinking about the details of this stuff. And that's when the eureka moment comes, and then you run in and you update your doodle and you get the details on that. And then when you go to build it, you either run with that or you come up with something different. But it definitely needs more time to get that complete, because I don't want to be building something here that I'm not going to be satisfied with. I want to be able, it's like the table saw. It's the reason why I'm spreading out the table saw over such lengths. Not only is it a huge project, but I want to make sure that I'm absolutely 100% happy with how that saw is going to work when I do get it built.